In this video, I will walk you through an automation I built to scrape the newest blog posts from a list of blog websites and summarize their content using AI. To show you the solution in action, here I have an Airtable with a list of blog websites. I'm going to choose to scrape these two. An automation gets triggered behind the scenes, which scrapes the list of posts from each one of those blog websites. Here are the post links getting populated. Then I can select which of these posts I want to scrape the contents of. And another automation gets triggered behind the scenes, which extracts the title and content from each blog post and also summarizes the content using AI. All right, so here's a high-level architecture diagram of the solution. And what I'll do is I'm going to walk you through each step and explain how I set it up. So this entire solution automates two main tasks. The first task is opening up a list of blog websites that I'm interested in scraping the posts of, finding where on the blog website the latest posts are listed, and then extracting the links of those posts. Because my goal is to scrape the actual content of the blog posts, but in order to access the content, I need to first have a list of the latest post links. So yeah, we're opening up the blog websites. We're finding the list. So here you can see on the Ahrefs blog, this is the list of the latest posts. On the HubSpot marketing, here is the list of the latest posts. So it's like a nested section inside the web page. And then, for example, on the Insta blog, it's under this latest blogs section here. So that's what the first part of this solution does. That's the first task that's been automated. And then once I have the list of the latest blog posts, the list of links of the latest blog posts, that's when I can automate the second task, which is opening up each blog post page and scraping the content, which includes the title of the blog post, as well as all the text that is in the main body of the article. All right, so now diving into the actual setup, I first have an Airtable base, which has two tables, blogs and posts. Let me open it up here. There we go. So blogs and posts. And on the blogs table here, I'm listing the blogs that I'm interested in extracting the posts of. So for each blog, I have the name, the blog URL. So this is the homepage of the blog website, which contains the list of posts. I have a scrape column here, which is actually it's a checkbox column where I can select which blogs I want to scrape. So this gives me the flexibility to only scrape a few of these blogs every day, right? So I don't need to be scraping all of them. I can, for example, while I'm doing my research, I can have this switched off. And then once I'm done with my research, I can switch on the ones that I want to start scraping. So Airtable acts not just as a data storage for me, it also acts as a control panel for my automations. And then I have three text fields here, which contain the CSS selectors that point to the web elements that I want to extract the contents of on each one of these blog websites. So you can see that I have a CSS selector for the post list on each one of the blog websites. I have a CSS selector that points to the title of each blog post, and a CSS selector that points to the content, or in other words, the actual body on each blog post. Now, I actually did a video on how I go about finding these CSS selectors and also how to initiate a web scraping automation. I'm going to put a link to that video in the description below if you want a more detailed step-by-step tutorial on this topic. But in this video, what I'll do is I'll show you an example. So I'll show you how I found the CSS selectors for this blog here. So I'm going to open it up and then I'm going to scroll down. So here's the section I'm interested in, right? So each one of these cards is a blog post, and I want to scrape the link, right? So the link could be in multiple places on each card. I see here that it's obviously under this title. If I click on the title, it takes me to the post. but it could also be under this read more button. There we go. So to find the CSS selector of these elements, what I did is I right-clicked on the page, I went to inspect. So these are the developer tools. So you can see all the HTML that constructs this web page. And I selected this inspect tool here and then hovered over the web elements where I think the link is under. So if I hover over this read more button here, I can see on the right that this HTML element has been selected, this span tag here. But on this element, I do not see a link. However, if I go a little bit above, so there's an A tag here which contains that span tag, I can see that this A tag has a link. And that link is actually the blog post link that I'm interested in. So my goal here is to instruct my web scraping automation to scrape the contents of this A tag. So I need to find the CSS selector that points to this A tag. And I can see that this element has a class attribute here, which contains all these CSS classes. So what I did is I copied these CSS classes that control the styling of the element. I pasted them in my field here in Airtable. I got rid of all these spaces between the class names and I replaced it with a dot, right? So the dot basically means that I'm looking for an element that has all these classes, all these CSS classes, not just one of them. So that's what it means by combining them together means that they should all be there. And then I also added an A at the beginning to say that I'm looking for an A tag that has all these classes, not just any element, because there could be multiple elements with all these classes. I want specifically the A tags that have these classes. So that's how I define the CSS selector that extracts the list of post URLs. And then to find the CSS selector for the title of each blog post, I opened up one of the blog posts here. I went to the actual blog post page. And then on this page, again, using the inspect tool, I hovered over the title. So that's the first thing I want to extract. And I can see the title is inside an H1 tag. But there could be multiple H1 tags in this page, right? So since this H1 tag does not have any classes, which would help me identify it, which would help the web scraping automation identify it, what I did is I instead said that I'm looking for the H1 tag that is under the header tag, because I realized there's only one header tag in the entire page. So I'm looking for the H1 tag that is inside the header, right? So that's how that's the CSS selector I constructed for this particular element. And you can see here on the Airtable, this is how I defined it. Header space H1, which means I'm looking for the H1 element that is inside the header element. And then finally for the content, so the actual body of the post, what I did here is I again used the inspect tool to find the content. So the content starts here. And I can see that the content is created with a bunch of paragraph tags, right? You see all these paragraph tags make up the content of the post. But what I wanted is an element that contains all these paragraph tags, because if I was to scrape every single one of these, it would be difficult to then put them together. So instead, I said that I want to see if there's an element that contains all of them. So if I scraped that element, then I would automatically scrape everything that is beneath it. So that's what I did. I hovered over at the top here, and I saw that there is a div tag, or in other words, a container that all these paragraph tags are nested under. And that container, that div tag, has a class blog post body. So that's what I use as a CSS selector. I copied that. I went to Airtable and I pasted that in. I then added a dot in front of it to say that this is an element. I'm looking for an element that has this class. And yeah, that's it. That's how I found the CSS selectors for this particular blog. And then I repeated the same process for all the other blog websites that I'm interested in scraping. So that's an overview of the blogs table. Now moving on to the post table, this is where I'm storing all the data I'm extracting from each blog post. So you can see that for each blog post record here, I have a title field and a content field. And these are the two things that I'm scraping from each post, the title and the content, using the CSS selectors that we just saw, title and content. And then here I have a scrape column, which is another checkbox column where I manually select which posts I want to scrape the contents of. Now, you might think that this is a bit unnecessary. Like I could have said that I want to scrape the content of all the blog posts that I extract from these blog websites. I could have done that. It's pretty easy to do. Or, another simple thing I could do here is by default have all of these selected, that's another way to do it. But the reason I wanted to have this manual check here is because there could be cases where, let's say 70% of the content, 70% of the posts on a blog are good and the other 30% are not that great. So I don't want to be, wasting automation resources scraping the content of blog posts that are not that good or I'm not interested in them. So that's why I wanted to have this additional selection option here before I start scraping the content of each post. Then here is a relation column. So this is a column that links the post to a blog record. So this is how I know which blog the post has been scraped from. And this is also a column that I have here on the blog records. It's called posts. And I'm doing the same thing. I'm linking a blog record to one or multiple post records. So it's a one-to-many relation. Here I have a link field. So this is where I'm storing the actual link of the blog post. And then finally, a summary field where I'm storing the summary of the content that the AI generates. So in my automation, I have a step where I'm taking all the scraped content from the blog posts and I'm sending it to the AI model to summarize it and generate this summary, which I'm storing in this column. So that's an overview of my Airtable base and the two tables inside it. All right, now let's take a look at the first automation in this solution, which is actually built in make.com. Now, this automation gets triggered every 5 minutes, so regular intervals every 5 minutes. And what it does is it retrieves the blog records from this table here that have the scrape column checked, right? So any that have this option checked here, they get retrieved by this automation. And then the next thing it does is it triggers the web scraper that will go ahead and extract the list of posts from each blog website, right? That's the aim of this automation here. And let me actually show it to you. There it is. So I'm using an Airtable search records module to get the records. Then here I have some variable modules where I'm constructing the payload for the API request. So this is a custom API request that I'm making to the web scraper. And yeah, I provided everything it needs in the payload and it gets triggered that way. So that's the first automation. Now, the web scraper that is actually being triggered by this automation is inside PhantomBuster. If you don't know what PhantomBuster is a web scraping platform. Here it is. If I go to solutions, you can see that there are a bunch of web scrapers in here, right? It has so many different web scrapers, especially for social media platforms such as LinkedIn. But the one I'm using is called Web Element Extractor. So this is a very flexible web scraper automation which allows me to specify exactly which web page I want to scrape and which CSS selector I want to extract, which web element I want to extract from that web page by defining the CSS selector of that element. So it's super flexible and it's ideal for this, for the use case, for the solution that I'm building. So you can see here that I have two of these, right? So I have one for the post list extractor and one for the post content extractor. So this is the one I'm going to talk about later. This is the one that I'm talking about right now. So this is the Phantom. This is the web scraper automation that gets triggered by this make scenario here. So I'm triggering this. It gets executed, it does its thing, it goes through every blog website, it retrieves all the post URLs. And then once it's done with this execution, it automatically triggers another make scenario. And the way it does that is via webhook. So if I go here on the setup of this Phantom, and I go to the advanced settings under webhooks, you can see that I'm able to define a custom webhook URL. So here what I did, if I go to that new automation that I'm talking about now, this one here, you can see that it gets triggered via webhook, right? So here I created a new make webhook. I copied that and I pasted it right there. So this means that as soon as the Phantom is done with this execution, by the way, Phantom is what an automation is called in PhantomBuster, just so you don't get confused. Once this Phantom is done with this execution, it will trigger that webhook, which will trigger this scenario, and it will also pass all the data that has been scraped, right? So all that information, all those post URLs will be available in this scenario to be processed, right? So that's what's happening here. Now the goal of this scenario is to take the post URLs and populate them in the posts table that I have in Airtable, right? Because that's where I'm storing the posts. Yes, I haven't yet scraped all the content of those posts. That's the next part. But I have the links. Therefore, with the links, I want to create new records in this post table. And for each record, I want to populate the link. And I also want to have a reference back to the blog record to indicate which blog that post has been scraped from. So that's what this automation does. And if we look closely here, there's actually two paths. There's one which is called post list scraper and one which is called post content scraper. So I'm actually using the same automation to process the results of both of the web scrapers that I'm launching. Right now, this is clear here on the diagram. You can see that these arrows point to the same automation. When it gets triggered by this Phantom, it goes down the first path, this one here. When it gets triggered by this Phantom, which we're going to see later, it goes down the other path, right? So there's a different set of actions that are performed based on which Phantom triggers it, right? And the reason for that is because I didn't want to have duplicate automations, because you can see here the initial part here where I'm getting the data and then parsing the data and having like this filter and stuff, like these things are the same. So I didn't want to have like a duplicate automation. I tried to consolidate things as much as possible for efficiency purposes when it comes to not just for mostly for organization purposes, I would say. You know, it makes it easier to manage this way. So yeah, this is what this automation does, and I'm pointing to it. This part of the automation does here, which gets triggered by this Phantom. So we're now here, right? So we now have a post table that contains all the links of the posts that we have scraped from the blog web pages. So now the next step the next step is actually a manual step, as I mentioned earlier. I go into these records here and I select the ones that I want to actually scrape the contents of. Once I have that, then another automation gets triggered. So this is another make automation, which is very similar to this other one we have here, which retrieves those post records that have the scrape option selected, and it then triggers the other Phantom, which will go into each one of those post pages and extract the title and the content, right? So if I go to the other Phantom here, there it is, right? So post content extractor, it will go in, the make automation that triggers it. So this one here will pass the selectors for both the post title and the post content, right? So the web scraping automation knows what I'm looking for on each one of those post websites. And once this is done, once again, I have a webhook, right? That triggers the exact same scenario that we looked at earlier, this one here. It triggers it, and now we go down the other path, right? Now we go down the post content scraper path. And what happens here is it populates the title and the content field with the values that have been extracted by the Phantom. And then we are, let's see where we are. We are here. The final step, it also summarizes the value of the content element with AI, right? So it passes the post content inside a user prompt in the AI model. And I'm saying here that your task is to summarize the scraped content of the blog post and the user that the user provides, right? That's the instruction that I'm giving to the model. So it takes the post content, it summarizes it, and then it populates that together with all the other fields in this table, right? So here's the summary. This is what is generated by the AI. All right, so now what I'll do is I'll go ahead and execute each one of these automations step by step and show you how it all works. So the first thing I need to do is go to the blogs table here and select which blogs I want to scrape the post links from. By the way, I removed all the posts from this table just so we start empty. And I'm going to say that I want to scrape the HubSpot one and let's say Ahrefs. Okay. And now if I go to the first automation here, it is, I switched it on, so it should get triggered every 5 minutes. So it has this timer that it's being executed at. But just to do it more quickly, I'm just going to click here to run it once manually. And as you can see, it was successfully executed. I get a 200 status code on the API request to the Phantom, which means that my, let me find it here. My post list extractor Phantom was successfully executed. There we go, 12 results found. And in the results here, I can see the blog post URLs that were scraped from the Ahrefs blog and the HubSpot blog. There should be more actually. There we go. And then here are the actual links of the posts. Now, once this finished executing, then this scenario should have automatically been triggered, which means that now if I go to the post table here, there we go. So we now have a record for each one of those extracted blog posts. And for each one, we have the link, right? So that's all the information we have right now, the link of the post and a reference back to the blog record, so we know which blog the posts were scraped from. So now if I go ahead and select some of these here, if I check the scrape column for some of these, the next automation, so we're now here, right? So this automation should now get triggered at some point, but I'm also going to go ahead and trigger this manually just to save time. There we go. If I go here, 200 status code, so the API request was successful. And if I go to my post content extractor here, I can see that it's currently running. And here is the data that is scraping from each blog post. Okay, so 10 results found. That's how many I selected, right? 1, 2, 3. Oh, sorry. It also takes in account like all the basically the title and the content count as 2 results, not just 1. So that's why it says 10, because there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah. Great, there we go. So title and content has been populated for each one, and the scrape checkbox has been deselected. And here, if we open up this, you can see all the content that was extracted from the blog post page. And then here is the summary that the AI generated for each blog post. So these are all the automations in action. All right, so that was an overview of the entire solution. I hope you found it useful. What I'll do is I'm going to add links to these tools here in the description below. And I'm also going to make these make scenario templates available for you to download together with the Airtable base, so you can replicate this. You can build it for yourself and use this solution in your own business. I hope that's helpful, and let me know in the comments below if you have any questions, any suggestions. If you want me to do a deeper dive into one of these steps here, let me know. Or if you want a tutorial, let's start a chat in the comments below. And yeah, with that said, thank you for watching, and I'm going to see you on the next one.